On stage two, certainly this morning, we discussed much about cybersecurity and AI. So we're going to diversify now into cloud computing and specifically migrating to the cloud, the strategies, pitfalls, good advice from people with the scars on their backs. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Paul Jennings from Kingston University, Andrew Johnson DeVette from NatWest Group, Saeed Abbas at DXC Technology, and Jason Normanton from Checkpoint. Welcome all, and thank you for being here. If at any time you want to ask a question, if you're in the room, pop your hand up. I'll try and catch my eye, and I'll come to you, come to your question, and we'll get a microphone to you so that everybody can hear it, particularly for our friends and colleagues at home. And if you're watching online, use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen there. Your questions come directly through to my iPad, and I'll relay those questions on. So that's the housekeeping. Welcome all. Thank you for being here. And without any further ado, cloud migration strategies. Let's just cover the basics. Why would you move to the cloud, and why would you not move? Jason, can I start with you on that?
Yeah. So the main thing is, you don't want to pay capex for your hardware anymore. You want to move to more of an operating cost model. Mm-hmm. Migration is sometimes easier with cloud technologies. You've got scalability, and you've also got the ability to stand on the back of giants. And what I mean by that is the cloud providers have put all sorts of services together that if you tried to build those within your own data center or location, could be very, very cost prohibitive. You can buy those on a pay-as-you-go, use-as-you-pay kind of model, and that really democratizes some functionalities like, high business intelligence and other systems and services that would otherwise be really expensive.
Thank you. Saeed?
If you would have asked me the question like 10 years back, I would have said cost. That's not the case anymore. I don't think that's the thing, right? So why would you want to move to cloud? Is if you are thinking transformative, if you're trying to transform your enterprise, really use the scalability and the next-gen technologies, right? Because you don't want to buy everything that's coming in market every day and out, right? So if you're really looking at scaling that next-gen technology, I think that's where thinking transformative, that's where you want to move to cloud. Where you don't want to move to cloud is you're trying to move as is your state, right? You are in a rush. You are in a phase where you are competing with your other enterprises, right? Where say, oh, those guys are 90% on cloud, why am I not, right? You don't want to get onto the cloud in that way. You don't want to get on the cloud for, let's say, legacy stuff. So legacy application, you don't want to get onto a cloud with those. My recommendation would be run them till their life cycle and get rid of them and transform. I think that would be my take.
Thank you.
Sure. So I think that the reasons that you would have been well explained by Jason and Saeed, I would just double down on the scalability point and being able to scale very quickly, the OpEx point that you've raised, and also all of those cloud services. There's certainly a fantastic reason for why you would move to the cloud. With respect to why you wouldn't, so Gartner and Google say that unless you completely change the way you manage your finances for cloud, you will overspend by 30%. And when considering some of these cloud budgets are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of pounds or dollars, whichever denomination you're looking at, it's a lot of money. So I think that's something to look at, and I think you really need to make sure that your business case stacks up. And when it comes to moving, for example, a mainframe onto the cloud, you've got to think about how you unpick a poorly documented, poorly understood system and move it onto the cloud. So there's some of the challenges and why some folks are starting to wonder whether the business case does stack up.
I echo everything that's been said, and for Kingston University, there are several components. One is minimise our data centre footprint. We don't want to be running data centres if we can help it. We do recognise that some services won't sit in the cloud. The CCTV with thousands of cameras might not be a good option for I/O. But we also want to move away from infrastructure management to providing great customer service. So the scalability, yes, absolutely. But being able to scale up something for a university, but also bring it back down. We want that sandbox environment. I echo all of that. There are challenges and pitfalls, and it's not for every organisation. I've worked for some orgs that it wouldn't work for, but for us, we're 40% way through our journey, and we're still learning. I think that's important. But yeah, I echo what's been said there. Scalability, resilience, and the security element, to your point on using that scale of giants that have well architected the environment.
Where do you start? Your existing systems are at the end of their life cycle or going to be in the next 5 years. How do you approach it? What is your strategy?
So, first of all, I've always recommended, and when I used to work at Gartner, this was my advice, to do a full inventory of all your applications.
Sure.
You then prioritize which ones you believe will be fit to move to cloud first, and you create what's called a wave plan. Within that wave plan, you then start your financial modeling, which is exactly right. There is some workloads that would be better to move to potentially rented equipment within a co-location facility. Other workloads that will be transformed to go directly into cloud or will be capable of being replaced with the cloud. For example, email, move that to something like Office 365, etc. Once you have that plan clearly in mind, then start to build the foundations of your cloud environment, and that would be your landing zones. Make sure that you're using third-party security there, because the native security tools are woefully lacking. Last year, a US senator actually wrote to Congress about a large cloud provider and said that their security tooling was not fit for purpose. So make sure that you have the foundations and that you're not, as one of my colleagues said, that you're not rushing. That you do it in a planned way, financial checks, model, and then re-financial check and model once you've deployed to make sure that the assumptions that you made in your planning stage are following through to your deployment stage. But that for me is the absolute key, is looking at all those applications and aligning them into a correct set of waves and when you're going to move them and where you're going to move them to.
When you're doing that, what are the pitfalls? What are the things you're going to get wrong?
So, making assumptions or not including the full gamut of costs. Mm-hmm. You might have an application that talks externally a lot and transfers a lot of data out. If you don't capture that, you're going to have to pay egress costs, which will all add to that bill. One of the things that you can guarantee with cloud is your bill will never get smaller. Once you've achieved that bill, you are on an increment moving forward. And that's why I think we're going to be in a hybrid world for a long period of time. And I would recommend that those legacy applications, the mainframes, the AS400s that aren't ready to be retired, that they go into a co-location facility, mm-hmm. and then you have high-speed connects into the cloud, so you're getting the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Where do you even start?
So I'll go to your first question first, right? How do you plan for it?
Yeah.
The way I see it is, it's a 70-30 rule, right? Now, the way I describe it is, I call it as, and that's my definition, it's not probably anywhere, it's P square and E and then O square. Now, square in itself tells you the magnitude of work that you need to do. So P square is prepare and plan. And that's where you really spend 70% of your time. I mean, that's what I would recommend. Honestly, execution, once it is done, it's okay. You got a lot of tools, you got a lot of different organizations supporting you, right? But that's more of a process, methodologies, program management, and tightly controlling that, right? And then the last O square is, again, very important, and I'm sure we will touch on when we discuss it, is how do we operationalize it, yep. and how do we optimize it, yep. right? And the square at both the sides, that actually gives you the magnitude of time and energy that you should spend. So execution is still there, but you should spend planning and prepare, and then optimize, and that's how I see it. We should deal with that.
And I think I completely agree. And just to bring some of that to life with respect to the planning and the inventory that you've done across all of your applications, which you could be likely in the thousands if you're a big organisation. So the 7 Rs or the 6 Rs or the 8 Rs, go through them, but they will tell you whether you're going to retire it, whether you're going to re-platform, etc. And you can categorise each of your applications like that. You need to work out how much is going to be done by a central cloud team versus how much is done by the individual application teams. So the central cloud team definitely has a role there to make sure that people have got guardrails to follow. There's Pathfinder examples that people can follow, and make sure people are sort of getting the best benefit from being in a largish organisation. Patterns, I think, are really important. So generally speaking, because large organisations have thousands of applications, it's very difficult to understand thousands of applications, like 2,000 applications, 5,000 applications. It's very difficult for anyone to understand that. So one of the things that organisations are doing today is putting them into patterns. You might have 20 to 50 patterns, and you talk about your estate with respect to these patterns and what you're doing with all of these patterns of application. Database could be a pattern. Analytics could be a pattern. Those types of patterns. And then I think with respect to the approach, what team does this? And as I said, you've got a central team and you've got the application team. I think that you need to make sure that you've got your A team on it, particularly if you're trying to get a mainframe onto the cloud. That's really, really important. It's the most difficult thing you can do. And forget the recruiters who say, oh, you don't want to work on mainframe, that's old technology, you'll become redundant in no time. Mainframe is very, very difficult. And if you can prove that you can do mainframe, you can do pretty much anything. And I think the last point on this is, how are we going with it? How's it all working? I think it's much slower than expected. I think that when this all sort of kicked off in 2017, 2018, everyone thought, it'll be done in about 5 years. That has not been the case for pretty much most organisations, certainly the big ones. Some of the big American banks have been saying they've still got sort of 5 years to go, 8 years to go. And one of the big British banks has just said, you know what, we're probably never going to get there. So I think it is just more difficult than what everyone expected.
I agree with that, Ange. And I would say that the technology is one component, and it's obviously the most important. But what we realised quite early is we need to establish FinOps up front. We have a FinOps lead in IT. X came from finance. Finance want him back now. They're not having him. He is essential to everything we do. So as we're 40%, we're in just completed wave 1 of migrations. The FinOps lead is essential, and we set that from the front, as is Cloud Business Office. So we set a Cloud Business Office up last year as the start of the journey, and that's essential, and that's got an audience from outside of IT as well. So we've got in that Cloud Business Office, we've got the strategy, we've got the governance, we've got the compliance, actually, and we've got a check on where we're at and where we're going, what's the lesson. So those components, with the people, making sure they're upskilling, they're on board. I agree with the A-team piece. Hopefully everyone's an A-team, but it's a challenge, right? People, process, technology. And the process piece also sits within CBO, Cloud Business Office. And that's a constant. We are meeting weekly. We have a core cloud group, we have a migration group, and we have a CBO every 2 weeks. That follows quite another key component as we lift from on-prem. I set up last year a technical architecture group, and what that's looking at, as we look at new applications, new services or modernisation of services, can that go to the cloud? So that CBO follows TAG every 2 weeks to say, any referrals from TAG? Because we're looking at cloud smart, cloud first, where we can. But not everything goes to the cloud.
How do you decide what goes to the cloud and what doesn't? What are the parameters?
There's obviously an I/O component, a performance component. There's a legacy application component. We're in wave 2 now, and I agree with I think you said patterns, Ange, how you migrate in patterns. There are certain apps that you just know are going to be complex, difficult, problem children that just
leave them alone.
Maybe they stay where they are.
Yeah.
But with that, we still want to reduce the footprint of the data center. So there's lots of technical components, aren't there? But there's one big advantage I missed earlier. By going to the clouds, you can report on the total cost of ownership a lot easier when services are sunk in your data center. That's my opinion. I've done both. I've migrated 2 data centers. I've migrated to the cloud. In my opinion, TCO is a very important element.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to add to the benefits of why you would do it, we said the cloud services. There are hundreds of cloud services.
Yes.
So if you go onto AWS, there could be 300 services that you can take advantage of. So what does that mean? Well, it means it's much easier for you to do continuous implementation, continuous delivery. And that means that your teams don't have to wait until the weekend to do a go live. They can do a weekend in the middle of a Wednesday if they want to.
Yeah.
And that's a massive advantage. And that's a real reason why engineers love it, because they don't really like giving up their weekend. I mean, who does? So I think that's a big advantage. But also observability is just another example. It's quite a hot topic at the moment. That just comes for free when you're on the cloud. You can use all of those services that are available there. So I think there is some really good reasons why you would do it. And then picking the applications that are applicable, I think you just need to go through those R's and just so rehost, replatform, refactor, repurchase, retire, retain, rewrite are the ones that I've got. But you just need to think, is it on an application? Do we want to keep it on that application and move it, or do we want to move it off? So is it on SAP? Do we want to keep the SAP? Is it an Oracle database at the back end or a mainframe at the back end? How do we want to move that? Do we want to leave it where it is? And are our microservices sitting on Red Hat Linux boxes potentially? Where would you want to move those, and how difficult would it be? And I think it's about going through the elements of your architecture for your applications and just looking where they're currently hosted and how difficult would it be to move it onto cloud hosting? And back to your point, Jason, can you have both together or not? And then how do you do your failovers and your backups as well, which is one of the points that the regulator for financial services is red hot on.
I think one of the major problems that you have as you go through that list of apps is there'll be quite a number of them that you don't own the code.
Yeah.
That they're not microservices based, that they're not ready to move to the cloud. It's a real monolithic architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on those kind of applications, you need to make a call about the business value, how long it's going to be in use, and is it actually worth doing anything with that? So I'm not talking about the compelling event, like I need to shut down a data center and close everything down and get out. But in the ideal world where you're migrating over time and you're doing it sensibly, there may be a whole bunch of apps that you just don't use that that app's going to be retired within the next 3 to 5 years or whatever. And it's like, okay, that will go into my bucket. The way we used to explain it to people at Gartner to talk to their C-suite about was, imagine a couple of swimming pools and you're draining one swimming pool whilst filling the second, and use megawatts. That's probably the best value to do it on. So I did have 100,000 megawatts of use in my main data center. I'm now at 100,000 megawatts within the cloud, or 50 or whatever, and that's the percentage that you've moved. But a lot of people, they mentioned, my colleague mentioned cloud first. Cloud first just means that any new application, I will assess it for its capability to be running cloud first. Doesn't mean it has to run in cloud. And I think that too many people get hung up on having everything in cloud, and that's when FinOps comes and bites them. And the final thing, I totally agree with a multi-skilled team.
Yeah.
I also think you need legal, you need financial, as was mentioned, and you need operations within that team, because you're signing new contracts, you're doing new pay-as-you-go strategies. So there's a legal and a procurement element within that, as well as the operational element. And it sounds like you've got that absolutely.
Absolutely agree, Jason.
Yeah.
Don't know about perfect, but you're still learning. But it's, I think the foundations are there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you're describing is a whole business approach,
Yes.
which, like everything we've discussed today, cybersecurity, AI, and clearly this is the only sensible way of going ahead. Otherwise, you're doomed to failure. Sorry, do you?
No, so I think, and that's I'm glad that we're having this discussion, right? Because I come from a GSI world, right, the global service integrator world, and the recipe for failure is if we only talk infrastructure. I think that's the recipe for failure for any cloud migration. And when we are discussing about business, we're discussing about application, I think that's the real value of cloud, right? That's where you want to move to cloud. And that's where, rather than calling it as just the migration, the cloud transformation still remains very valid, right? Because we should think about the transformative approach rather than just doing the migration of it.
So a theme for myself on stage 2 today is to ask AI, open source AI, for the insightful questions. So here's the first one from my good friend Chat. Do tell me if it's a rubbish question. But it asks, how do you ensure data integrity and consistency during large-scale migrations, especially for transactional systems? So that's AI's question. Is it a good question, a rubbish question? And can you answer it anyway?
I think it's a reasonable question.
Okay.
And it kind of plays into what Saeed has just been saying. You know, we've moved away from IT owning the entire estate. We just deliver services for the business. And that's where the business owner comes in. You know, the data is theirs. So if you're migrating an ERP system, you're going to want to run an end of quarter, end of month, end of year check with that business unit to ensure that you're getting the same results from the legacy system that you get from the new system.
Yes.
And they should be the ones who ultimately sign it off. You know, it's no good me saying, yeah, that's all finished, everything's spinning in the cloud. It's actually the business unit. Did you get the transformation that you wanted? Is everything good? And then that can be signed off on them.
Yeah.
Sure, there are examples of that within the banking world.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that people think of data and they think it's all the same thing. It's just data. It's just one big bucket and we call it data. But that's not the case. Data could represent a product, a service, a customer impact, a colleague impact. It could represent something to do with the process. It could represent the technology. So a piece of data really needs to be analysed so that you can work out what the impact is of moving it across to the target. And will it be the same when you move it to the target, or actually does the data need to change when you move it to the target? And I think the other really interesting point about data, which is what kills most decommissioning jobs, is orphaned data. Because you get to the end and you're like, well, we've gone to the data owner for all of these pieces of data, but now we've got to this part where we've got all this data and we don't know who owns it. And we don't really know whether we should just move it or whether we should just delete it or what we should do. So oftentimes what ends up happening is you think, well, let's just leave the application on so that the orphan data can just stay there because we don't know what else to do with it. So I think that's really interesting with respect to data integrity.
Yeah. Or you decommission the equipment and leave it sitting in a rack so you can turn it back on if somebody comes and screams about that
Where's
data.
my data?
When I worked in financial institutions, every system that I shut down stayed within that rack for at least 6 months, just in case anybody shouted.
It's
and then
insurance.
you could bring it back on and start it back up.
Yeah.
I think to follow on with the business stakeholder, what's amazing in the journey is when you engage the business stakeholder in the migration, you know, you've got your run books and what's this engagement look like? And the business stakeholders, wow, this is quite something. I've not looked at this for a while. But the sign off, as you said, Jason, the business stakeholder. And that's challenging because they're busy too. You know, for us as a university, June and July, our academic community are away. So we need to, in May, get some massive engagement as part of Wave 2. But yeah, it's that constant relationship. And I think it's not an IT journey, is it? It's a business journey. Our COO sponsors our cloud transformation. She has all of the business represent. That's so important. The other one is clear and constant communication. Now, we've moved services and applications that have moved successfully, but actually when you look at they're now on cloud, you've got to tweak, tune, resize as part of that optimization. And that's challenging for the team.
Yes.
But, you know, there are huge benefits as we've talked, scalability, TCO, etc.
True.
And I think, just to add to that, I think the sponsor of the overall program absolutely needs to be the CEO.
Yeah.
Because then everything is driven from the top down.
Yeah.
Because you will get people who don't want change. You know, they enjoy the way that things work. They enjoy what they're doing now, and they don't want to move. And then you might need to go to that level to get some momentum moving again. So the most successful programs that I've always seen are the ones that are driven right from the top. So there can be no, you know, oh, I'm not going to do that. No, we're too busy. We can't. You know, you've got to make time for it, and you've got to follow it through. Otherwise, you'll end up transforming forever.
I agree, and I kind of call it as IT transformation fatigue, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't stop here. I mean, you got to go ahead and get on to a next journey, and I'm sure you'll get a question there probably on AI and all those new stuff that we do on cloud, right? So it's not that once you do a cloud transformation, you just stop, right? So it's a continuous transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen one example where that didn't work. So it was with one of the big British banks, very early days, and they were running lightning quick. And the CEO was like, yeah, put everything onto the cloud as fast as we possibly can. We've got to get there before
See, that was
everyone
wrong
else.
strategy, though, rather than wrong sponsor.
Well, yes, wrong strategy of the sponsor, who was the CEO. But I don't know if the regulator just...
Never let the CEO set strategy.
Well,
Sorry.
fair enough. And I don't know if the regulator was watching it and they just weren't ready for how fast they were going, or whether they really were putting themselves at risk, which is what the regulator thought was going on.
Yep.
But they 100% got slowed down by the regulator. It's like, calm down. Yeah. You're not going to run at this as fast as you think you are. You need to go slower. And that's exactly what they had to do. But that was a definite example of, yeah, I guess maybe CEOs shouldn't make strategy. Good point.
The next question that I wanted to throw at you from my dear open source AI friend, I think you've already answered it. It was about legacy systems. But there's a rather brilliant question that's come in from one of our viewers online. And it says, have any of you encountered a situation where cloud migration wasn't the right answer in the end? And if so, how did you pivot?
So I have been speaking to a few organisations about this, and it has definitely happened. It hasn't happened to me specifically, but it has happened for sure to other organisations.
Yep.
And they have gone back to on-prem.
Yep.
So, yeah, they reversed their cloud migration and then moved back onto premise. I think some of the things, I think cost is a big one that has been blowing people out of the water. And as I mentioned, Gartner and Google saying 30% is quite a lot. But I think people just running at the cloud and that being a problem. One of the issues was egress charges. So if you've got if you've got a failover or you've got an incident or data, you need to come back onto prem. The costs were exorbitant. However, my understanding is most cloud service providers have now neutralised those costs. So
reduced them, but not fully got rid of them yet.
Okay.
But yeah,
even if you wanted to migrate, so say you've got a disaster recovery issue and you need to migrate onto another cloud, that also had a massive cost incurred. However, I think, as you say, both instances, coming back onto prem and going onto another cloud, the cost of that has come down. So whether that has made the business case more attractive is to be seen.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'm going to probably, and coming from GSI world, like I said, right? And I have many scars, like you started with, right? So because I kind of work with a lot of customers across the globe and everything, right? So I have seen transformation fail. I have seen organization backing out as well. But again, they have to again stand up with the new and different strategies because they cannot be always sitting at that old legacy world, right? So it's just the change in the direction, change in the approach, right? But the failure does not or should not define that you stay on that legacy.
Yeah.
And I have had many experiences, right? And maybe I won't be able to quote it from my current organization, right? But I can give an example. Lamborghini, I think 2007, right? They ran a massive cloud transformation and they miserably failed, right? And they stopped it for 7 years. And after 7 years, they've started again, but with a different approach altogether, right? Not big bang, not lift and shift, right? It's a different way. So I think it's about when you fail, how do you stand up, go back, rewrite your journey? And but you got to go there. There is no way that we can stand there, right? You are not going 100% on cloud. You may be hybrid, you may be multi, right? Whatever. But you got to go there at some stage.
I mean, I think the failures are really interesting.
Oh, yes.
I mean, for me, I think the root cause, I'm aware of one major failure, you know, tens of millions of pounds,
Yes.
multiple years, completely failed. And to my mind, it was because 10 years ago, if they'd done it waterfall, like everything was done in waterfall, I reckon they probably would have succeeded. But because they'd gone straight into agile, they were just like, oh, look how many sprints we're getting done. We are so good at getting through 2 weeks. So good. But there was no real measurement with respect to the outcomes that were being generated and were they, you know, percentage increments towards their overall goal. It was just, we're running sprints and it's fantastic. Well, actually, that's a massive recipe for failure.
Yeah.
So I think the big difference is you must be clear on what your overall outcome and endpoint is, and you must be measuring obsessively on your way to getting there.
Yeah, I think, you know, from my time working at Gartner as a research director in cloud and working with multiple companies, the only ones that I saw that really failed, apart from the ones that had terrible strategy that was never going to work, were the small startups.
Okay.
Where they build an application, they maybe net it into a lot of cloud services, and then as that scales out massively, it becomes way too expensive.
Yep.
So, you know, there is a time to use cloud services, but there's also a time to have those services built yourself on a microservices-based architecture and to use them. The ones that I've seen that have been, you know, cloud strategies that have failed were usually around lift and shift of big organizations where they just tried to run. And it was just, we need to get out of this data center within 9 months, throw everything up there, and nobody thought about cost and nobody did any checks around cost or around the, you know, what it was going to cost. And as I said, once you get above around about 8 cores on an instance within the cloud, you're probably going to be able to run that more cost effectively on rented hardware within a colo location.
I think what's really key there, so I've not seen a transformation fail. What I have seen, though, is a U-turn in strategy. So in a previous org, we did a discovery on cloud, a full discovery on every app, every service, and quite a large org. The upshot of that discovery was, though, that cloud wasn't the journey we were going to go on. So actually it was invest in infrastructure, but not on-prem, move the infrastructure to a colo. Yeah. And that discovery was incredible. It was so detailed. It had cultural challenges as well. People thought, oh, again, the cloud, about my job. But actually, it reinforced that some services, I mean, we're running research compute, high performance compute, and some of that, to take that to the cloud is quite challenging. Yeah. And the cost, you know, probably restrictive.
I'd like to just pick up a little theme of costs and how to save money or spend lots of money if you wish in just a second. But a gentleman over there has got a question to ask. Amber, the microphone will come flying your way with a mic, sir. Middle of the middle. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kedar. So I have a question we have got a couple of giant CPs, cloud providers. So if I have a startup, how can I select a proper one which is cost effective and best for my company?
So you've got a startup and you want to know what enterprise architecture to go with respect to cloud.
Yeah. Well, migrate.
Ask ChatGPT would be my first.
It's what I do.
I would definitely do that. I'd find an enterprise architect. If you're not an enterprise architect, I would find an enterprise architect and I would speak to them for as long as they'll let you speak to them and see if you can get that person to pull together something for you. And then I would get second opinions on it, or maybe even a third opinion, because I think getting your architecture right at the beginning is critical and will set you up for success or failure. Yeah. The other thing I would just add with respect to startups, which I think is really interesting, is you might think, you know, a startup's only a year old or 2 years old. Even a year-old or two-year-old startup has got legacy tech. Would you believe it? So I think you're going to make the best decisions you can today, but just be aware that whatever it is you're building, in 1 or 2 years' time, you'll want to rip it up anyway.
And don't to relate to that, Ange, don't focus on the now. What's that end state? How do you scale it? What's that startup's journey? And how do you match that journey for cloud if that's the appropriate route? Not easy. But I do echo, get some advice, get some second advice.
Yeah. Thank you.
We have a question that's come in online, which is a wonderful segue into the money. In fact, it's all about the money. How do you stop teams from overspending in the cloud? And let's widen that out a bit.
So you have to charge back.
FinOps.
You have to charge back. So
Yeah.
a lot of companies that I've worked with have said, hey, we show the department heads how much their department costs to run in the cloud. Show back does not matter, you know. At home, my wife complains about the amount of IT equipment that I've got running, and she shows me the electricity bill.
Yep.
And I keep it running. If, however, well, I do pay it, but if, however, you know, you're forced to pay that bill yourself,
Yeah.
then you will be more mindful.
It's ownership, isn't it?
Yeah, and things like, you know, developers leaving systems on a night time over a weekend, if you're only showing them what that's costing, they'll carry on with that behavior.
Yeah.
If you start to charge them back, their department head will demand that they turn stuff off when they're not working on it.
But if you get the tagging right up front,
Yep.
you right-size the environment, you've got your FinOps function all over it, you stop that. You know, it's not a play tool, is it? It's costing an org money.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that all
tagging-
goes hand in hand with the chargeback.
Of
So,
course.
yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Ange.
But I just the tagging is not trivial.
No,
So
no,
I think
no.
getting that right is very important.
That's a learning cycle in its own right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think in phases is what I would say. So, you know, you might start with showbacks and then do chargebacks, but and keep going. You know, everybody should be forecasting, predicting how much they're going to spend, and then be held accountable for how much they do in fact spend, and to the nth degree. And that's why we talk about Gartner and Google saying you're going to overspend by 30% unless you completely overhaul the way in which you do your finances. Because if you think about it, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you just had one finance business partner who was your business partner for IT. Yeah. He would have a meeting for an hour once a month with the CIO, and they would chat about finances, and it would be quite boring, really. So now with it moved to the cloud, it's not boring at all. It's a huge amount of work, and it really does need to be invested in.
Yeah.
Agree. No, I think Paul said FinOps. I mean, it's real, right? You got to put the governance, you got to put the framework, you've got to put show back, charge back, everything together. So it's a multi-dimensional scheme that you need to put. And one other important point, right? When we say this multi-dimensional, world is moving toward hybrid, right? Now, the whole FinOps strategy has to be as an orchestration layer. It just cannot be for a public cloud, right? It just cannot be. So you got to use that as an orchestration layer, I would say.
You need to know the costs of everywhere where that workload can live. That's the only way that you can make a true view on what's right about it. And the final piece, we've been giving a lot about finance and how it's all doom and gloom. There is a positive side to it as well. You know, years ago when I used to be a project manager, program manager within banking, if I wanted to start something new, you know, you had 4 to 5 weeks ordering equipment. You had maybe a month getting it signed off. You then had to put it in a data center, maybe it's another couple of months. So before I could do anything, you've got 4 months gone.
Yep.
Now I can take out my credit card. I can quickly spin something up. I can see if it works, see if it adds business value, and I can probably expense that test. And then if the business see true value in it, I don't even need to write a business case. They'll just sign off the expenses and I can move forward with it. So that level of agility and innovation is the flip side of that finance coin.
Yep.
To follow, could I add some to that, Jason? So, yeah, the cost's clearly important in everything we do. But when you look at automation, you know, you automate your provisioning, your certificate management, your shutdown of test and dev services in the wee hours. And when you add that up and you take reduced manual effort, people's skills are different, you're utilising your IT team differently. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the cost, it will scale. You know, it will dip, but you're on top of it because you've got FinOps, you're working with your provider. Hopefully, you know, they're mature enough to understand that. I think there's many more benefits than negatives.
I think just to kind of summarize that, right? Not from a cloud transformation point of view, and when I said O square, right, operate and optimize, it's all about also retransforming or transforming your operating model.
Yeah.
I think if we do not do that, again, it's a recipe for failure, right? Because if we continue to run the operations in a same model where we were working with the pre-transformation mode, I think, again, because some of these practices like FinOps and optimization, that doesn't even come in picture, right? So I think, and again, that's one of the, probably I would say, hidden cost that enterprises generally does not consider while planning for the transformation on reskilling the people, transforming the operating model. And I think those are the hidden costs, I would say, that enterprises should consider.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that there is at least one cloud service provider which has got a department which is all about customer success.
Yes.
And they are incentivized by saving the customer money from the cloud service provider. I'm only aware of one of them doing it.
Yeah.
The rest of them, I think, are very happy for you to just be
yes.
overspending and for them to take all of your
Absolutely.
money. But there is at least one that does that. And I think that if your cloud service, if you've got a relationship with your cloud service provider, I would say, repeat what I've just told you and say, can you please give me someone who can help us decrease our bill and maximise our usage?
Agree.
There are also frameworks you can sign up to. OGVA, for example, OGVA 2 is the latest one, where if you guarantee a minimum spend, you get 23% discount. Yeah. So if you're on top of that, you know, that's...
And, you know, by identifying what workloads are going to run, you can do things like reserved instances or get spot instances.
Correct, yeah.
So there are multiple ways where you can reduce that cost, but it's all around control again. You know, you need to know what you're doing.
Yes.
If you're in there and you're panicking and it's kind of haywire, you're going to get charged a lot of money. If you go in there and you know what you're doing, you've got your eyes open, you've got a strategy, and you know that those workloads are going to run for the next 3 years, take a reserved instance on them for 3 years, you'll save 60% of the running cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're saying it comes back to the waves of planning.
And understanding the services.
Absolutely.
I mean, really understanding the cloud. And it's huge. I mean, the solution architecture course alone's got 30 topics, and within it, I reckon there must be 500 different definitions of different pieces of tech. I mean, it is immense. So, and you do need to know those things so that you can take that advantage.
I would say, just to add to that before anything starts, hire a cloud architect.
Absolutely.
That's the pivotal person within the entire organization. And that person needs to then spread that word out across the whole organization.
I mean, the AWS, the Udemy AWS Solution Architecture certification, I think, is well worth it. I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, so am I.
Hey?
Hopefully I pass.
Oh, it's really hard.
With literally 2 minutes left before the end of this session, can I ask a question which is vaguely irrelevant, but it exercises my mind? We all talk about cloud migration. The drive is towards cloud migration. It's what we've all got to do, hybrid model or whatever. But I look at the geopolitical situation and I look at boats in the seas trying to drag their anchors across our power lines. And I see data centers consuming ever more vast amounts of electricity. How secure is it really? If I was a CEO, I'd be thinking, great idea and all that, but actually, is cloud sustainable? Is it secure?
So you can build it in so that you've got high availability. So you can have your application running in the United Kingdom, in Central Europe, in the United States. And that would protect you from, we were talking about blackouts earlier. So, you know, I was in, unfortunately, the Portugal-Spain blackout, which put everything down.
Exactly that.
But had those organisations been able to leverage, you know, availability zones in other completely different locations like the United States and the UK, then perhaps it wouldn't have gone down, you know.
And to achieve that level of resilience running data centres yourself, my word, that's huge investment.
Yeah, it's a big, it's very expensive.
By taking different regions, as Ange just said, you spread that. And security, you know, we run the AWS well architected review. We're doing an independent review of it. You just, again, keep on top of that.
I mean, I go back to a story from my Gartner times. Walmart 2 years, 200 developers to build their own cloud because they didn't want their data on AWS.
Makes perfect sense.
At the end of that 2 years, they actually closed down the department and migrated to Microsoft Azure because it was too expensive to run OpenStack.
Yeah.
If they think that AWS would have spied into how many baked beans Walmart sold in Iowa, they are absolutely crazy as an organization. Because that business is currently worth 60 billion to Amazon. And Amazon would not put 60 billion at threat.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same way with what's happening in the White House and everything else and the global situation. Hyperscale cloud computing is such a cash cow now that they will protect it. They will not put it under threat. And I see in France and Germany, where I do a lot of work, they're going for sovereign cloud instances. We did it here in the UK with UK Cloud, and it went bankrupt about 2 years ago. You cannot build the scale. All you can do is host VMs, and that is not the value model for cloud, isn't hosting VMs. Do that in co-location on VMware yourself. Sorry, that's my...
A final word, sir.
So it's interesting, right? Because I was with a CIO 2 weeks back, and he asked me the same question on the geopolitical situation, right? And to your point, right, we can have different availability zone, but this CIO, and he had a valid concern, right, that with all the geopolitical stuff, right, even within Europe, right, we can't say that we're going to go ahead and operate you out of these locations, right? So that's a very interesting question. I think if I reflect back to your question, right, you had 2 points. One is data, right? Data sovereignty, right? I think that's definitely a question. And I think there are a lot of research that's going on in terms of how do we do that. There's no definitive answer, I would say, right? I think you mentioned a very interesting point about this electricity outage, and there was a discussion around the usage of electricity, right? Putting one bucket from other. I personally do not see the whole electricity situation with cloud and with generative AI coming in, improving anywhere. It's going to be the topic of future.
Yeah.
I can tell you it's enormous. I mean, just to run a single LLM generative AI model in a cloud or a data center, it is going to generate 300 tons of CO2. Just one single. Think about, so I think all these things are going to be the topic of future and how we are going to go with data sovereignty, with all these geopolitical and cloud and the electricity or whatever other situation that we have. And that's how I see it.
I'm going to buy shares in power generators. I think it's the only way to go. I'm sorry, we must stop here and now because we've got one final keynote coming up. A fireside chat with Tia, who's over there, with future-ready skills from multi-generational workforce. And we've talked a lot about the need to train up, so we'll touch on that next. But panel, can I thank you for a completely absorbing panel discussion. We didn't get anywhere near through the topics that I wanted to, but hey, that's possibly a good thing. Thank you very much indeed, panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.